Hi everybody, Len here, and now I'm going to give you a demonstration of various ways to import data into Distance, and I'm going to talk about non-geographic data here. If you want to know more about this, you can look in Distance under the Help. In Chapter 5, Data in Distance, there's a section called Getting Data into Distance, and in there's a subsection about data import. So everything I'm going to talk about here is covered in the help. Okay, so in order to import data into Distance, we do it through text files, but I'm going to start here with a spreadsheet file. So this is in Excel, but you may be using a different spreadsheet. What I've got here is the data arranged into with each observation in a row and various bits of information in columns. So here in the first column I have the names of my strata, and in the second column I have the stratum area. In the third column I've got my line transects. This is a line transect study. I've got my line lengths, my line names, the line labels, line 1A, 2A, 1B, 2B, etc. And in the next column here I've got the line lengths, and lastly I've got the distances to the things that I saw. So we can see, for example, that on this line 1A here I saw 3 objects, so one at distance 14, one at distance 8 and one at distance 22, and you can see that the line length is the same because the line's the same. So this is just one line where I've seen 3 things. On line 2A, which is in stratum A as well, I saw 3 things again. The line length was 10.3, it's repeated 3 times, and the 3 things were at 7, 37 and 13. And then line 1B, which was 5.7 units long, there's a blank there because I didn't see anything at all. So obviously I need that line in my data set because I need to know that I surveyed that line, but I'm going to need to tell Distance I didn't see anything. So you don't put a 0 in here because that would mean that you'd seen something at 0 distance. Instead of that, you leave it blank. On line 2B in stratum B, it looks like I saw 2 things. It was of length, 4 things, sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4 things. It was of length 8.4, and I saw things at 27, 76, 44 and 7, probably meters from the line. Let's say these are meters. So that's an overview of how data needs to be structured. Of course, your data set may be much bigger than this, and I'm going to show you other ways that you can set up data to import it, but this is a very basic structure. One thing to say is that things need to be sorted. So it needs to be sorted by stratum and then by line. If I had line 1A for a bit here and then a bit more on line 1A down there, that wouldn't get imported correctly into Distance. So you sort by stratum first and then by line, or by point if you have point transect data. Okay, so Distance can't read in spreadsheet files directly. We need to go through text files. So I'm going to save this as a text file before I import it into Distance. So File, Save As, and there are 2 basic types of text file. There's a CSV file, which is a text file with commas between each of the columns, and the other is down here text, and in this case it's tab delimited. So I'll choose CSV file for now. It doesn't matter, Distance can cope with both of those. It's called simple data, so it's going to be called simpledata.csv once it gets saved. I'll just save it. There we go. Now I should be able to exit my spreadsheet. And this now is my file explorer inside Windows, and you can see that I have a file here called simpledata.csv. And if I just open that with a text editor, I've got a text editor called TextPad. Here it is. You can use Notepad or any other editor you like. You can see that this is a text file and it has commas. There's a comma between each of the columns, and the first row here is the labels of the header. You can have that, or Distance can cope if you don't have that too. And then after that, each row is one of those lines of data, and you can see here's the one that didn't have any distances associated with it. Okay, so I have my text file now. I'm ready to import this into Distance. So I'm going to fire up Distance. Let me just close this. Fire up Distance. There we go. And the first thing I'm going to do, I don't have a project to import these into, so I'm going to create a new project. So File, New Project. I'll call it Simple Data. Simple Data. It's telling me that I already have one with that name. Do I want to replace it? That's fine. I must have created a Simple Data project before. Okay, I'm in the New Project Setup wizard. I want to analyze a survey that's been completed. This is just an introductory screen for setting up for analyzing a survey. It's asking me what type of survey, so it's line transects, single observers, not double observers. That's a more complicated protocol. I've got perpendicular distances rather than radial distances and angles, and I've got single objects, not objects in clusters, so that's all fine. This is the units. Well, we haven't talked about units for these data because I just made the data up, but let's say that the distances are in meters, transect lengths are in kilometers, and area is in hectares, let's say. You can just drop this down and choose another unit if you prefer. So that's fine. This is asking about multipliers. I don't have any multipliers in this project. Okay, it's asking me where, it's finished collecting information about setting up the project. It's asking me where to go next. And data entry would be typing data in by hand. So no, I want to go to the project import wizard. So that's how I'm going to import my text data from my text file. So if I just click finish now, there we go. It's finished setting that up, and it's started the import data wizard. So it's asking me, it's giving me a set of introductory information. If I click next, it's going to ask me where to get the file from. So here we go. It's asking me where's the file containing data to import. So I've got it in a slightly annoying place. Now I think about it, I'll have to go find it. It's in here. Oops. Demonstration files. Okay, so it's not a txt file. So if I just click on all files, it's there. It's that simpledata.csv. If I click OK. Okay, it's taking me. It's got the file name, and it's now asking me which data layers to import. Remember that there are 4 data layers in standard distance projects: study area, stratum, observation, transects, sample, and observation. And it's the highest data layer that I want to import is the stratum layer, which it's called region. It's given it the name region. And the lowest is observation. So I want to import the region, the line transect, and the observation layers all in one go. I want to add new records under the first in the parent layer. Yes, that's fine, because the first record in the parent layer is the study area layer, which only has 1 record in it. And I want to create 1 new record for each line in the import file. Yes, I certainly want to do that. In general, when you're importing data the way I've just shown you, you can leave all of these settings at their defaults. These are for other ways of importing data, some of which I'll talk about later in this lecture. Okay, so it's tried to read the file. Here it is. And it's not read it successfully. It thinks there's only 1 column in it. That's because it thinks the default delimiter it uses is tab. So if I make the default delimiter comma, there we go. Now it's spread them out nicely into the different columns. I also want to say do not import the first row, because the first row here is a header. So there we go. Do not import the first row. Here, if you're using, for example, if you're in a country where you use, as an example, a comma for a decimal, then you would keep this as use regional settings. But if you're in a kind of country where that's your regional setting, but you've exported the file to use a dot for a decimal, then you click on this button here. This is just telling me I've got 11 rows and 5 columns, which I think is right. So I should be able to click next. Now it's asking me to tell it which columns are which. So I have to tell it which is where each column should go in the distance project. So this first one, for example, is the stratum label. So the layer name here, if I just click on this, the layer name that it's given the stratum layer is region. So region, and then, oops, I clicked that button twice. So if you just click on these, you get a drop down label. Yep, that's fine. If I just click on field type, there we go, it automatically sets that as label. Region, this one is the area. So, and the drop down only contains area now because label's already been used. That's fine. This one is in the line transect layer. So line transect It's the label, not the line length. This one is the line transect line length, and this is the observation distance. So observation layer, perp distance, that's fine. So distance has already set those fields up when I did the create project wizard, so that's why it knew what all those fields were. I could have, instead of clicking all those things, I could have just done a shortcut and ticked this box here, which is columns are in the same order as they appear in the datasheet, because I know that when distance sets up new projects, it sets up columns in the order stratum label, stratum area, sample label, sample length, and observation. So let's try this. Hopefully if I tick this thing, there you go. It hasn't changed anything. So I could have saved myself some time and just ticked that in the first place rather than setting all these things. That's only if you have your data set up with the columns in exactly this order, which you may well not do. Okay, if I press next, it's just telling me that it's going to import 11 rows and 5 columns from this file. It's going to overwrite any data I have already. Well, there isn't any data in there because I just set the project up. So if I click finish, there we go. It's finished and it's opened the project, and if I look under observation, there we are. I can see that there are 3 observations in the first transect, 3 in the next, 4 in the last, and then there's this one that doesn't have any observations in it. Okay, so that's a very straightforward way of doing things. Let me just close this project. It's asking me if I want to close the project, so I say yes. And I'll go back, whoops. There we go. I'll go back to my to Windows Explorer. I want to show you the case when you have an extra column that you want to import. So here's an example. If I just open this one up in my text editor. Here's an example where I have an extra column here. This is a column that's got, this one says Ellie, these ones say deer. So this is a species column where I've got the species of each observation. You'll see this is a little different from my last text file as well, because there's no header, and also because I'm using semicolons to delimit the different columns rather than last time I was using commas. Distance will cope with commas or semicolons or tabs. So how do I import this thing when there's an extra column that I need to create? Well, there are 2 ways of doing that. So if I just close this file, go back into distance. The first is that in both cases I'm going to set up a new project, but in the first case I'm going to just create that new column while I'm importing the data, and in the second case I'm going to create the new column before I import the data. Okay, so let's do the one where I create the new column when I'm importing the data. So File, New Project, and I'll call this one Simple Project Species, and create it. Okay, exactly the same as last time. Analyze the survey that's been created. Next through this, those are all fine. I'll use the same units, no multipliers. Go to the data import wizard. Data import wizard has started. I need to give it the file name, and again I need to go find that file all the way down here somewhere. Distance online, demonstration files, there it is, simple data species. These are all fine as before. I need to tell it that it's semicolon delimited. There we go. I don't need to say do not import the first row because this one doesn't have any headers. There are 11 rows and 6 columns this time because there's that extra column. Okay, so now I have this extra column. So if I tick columns are in the same order as they appear in the data sheet, it gives me an error message which says that there are more fields in distance than columns. So that hasn't worked. Okay, so if I untick that again. So I'm going to have to do it by hand. So region label, region area, transect label, transect line length, observation distance. Okay, so now I know that this goes in the observation layer, and I'm going to want to create a text field, sorry, a text, field, column, and I'm going to call it species. So if I click here, observation, now when I click on this one, I don't get a drop down, I get a text entry field. So I can type in, it's called new field by default, species. And if I just click down here on the field type, now I've got a drop down because before the fields were already created, so their type was set. But now I've got a drop down where I can set the type. So I'll set it as text. I'll just click somewhere else. There we go. So that's going to create a new field here called species. Oh, I put translate, sorry, that's wrong, isn't it? Oops, I want it in the observation layer. There we go. Species. Glad I saw that. Type text. There we go. Okay, it's going to go in the observation layer of type species. It's going to be called species and it'll be of type text. So if I click next and click finish, here it is imported. And you can see that I've got a new field here called species. And then, for example, I could use the data filter to pick out different species in my analyses. Obviously, this is not a suitable data set for analysis in distance because there are only 10 observations, but presumably you'll have a lot more observations than that. Okay, let me show you the other way of creating this field. I'm going to create the field before I do the import. So let me just close this project. There we go. I'm going to create a new one. We'll call this one simple project species 2. Okay, so I want to analyze a data set that's been, a survey that's been completed. That's the introduction to the project setup. These settings are fine. Again, I'll use the default units, no multipliers. Okay, this time I'm going to say exit wizards and return to distance because I want to create the new field before I do the data import. So if I just click on finish here. Okay, distance opens the project, and what it's done is by default it's got one transect in it, one stratum in it, in the region, in the stratum layer that's called region, with no area, and it's set up one transect of length 1. I don't mind about those because those are going to get overwritten when I import my data. What I want to do here is I want to create a new field, and I want to create it to the right of this perp distance field. So if I just click on perp distance, these buttons along the top here let me create new fields. So insert new field before current, that's going to put it to the left of perp distance. Append field after current, that's going to put it to the right of perp distance. And delete current field, that will delete the perp distance field, which is something I don't want. So I should be clicking on this one, append field after current. You can also do that up on the data drop down here. There's exactly the same thing, append field. So whichever of those I click will do the same thing. Okay, I click that button and it asks me what the field name is. So in this case it's going to be species, and the field type is going to be text, and so there are no units. And the data table it's going to go in is the observation table. That's okay. There, so you can see it's created that field there. If you create it in the wrong place, if you don't like where it is within a layer, you can just drag it, just pick it up like that and drop it, and then it'll move it around. You can't obviously move them between layers because they have different meanings in different layers, but you can move them within layers. Okay, so now I've got the data structure, the basic data structure the way I want it. Now I can import my data. So if you look under Tools, there is the Import Data Wizard, which is exactly the same thing that we've been using already. So if I click on that, it brings up the Import Data Wizard, and I can choose the file. I have to go find it again. Demonstration files, simple data species. I have to give it the right delimiter. No header. Now I should be able to tick columns are in the same order as they appear, and hopefully that'll work. Doesn't look like it does it? It's forgotten about the delimiter, unfortunately. That's annoying. Okay. I'll need to go back and do it by hand then. Interestingly, that seems to have worked that time. I can't explain that, I'm afraid. What I did was I went back and just clicked on another one of these and then clicked back on semicolon, and it seems to have remembered it this time. I'll class that as a bug, so maybe you won't find that problem when you try doing it this way. The other possibility is I could have just unticked that, and let me go back again, and entered all these by hand, as I have done before. Region label, region area, transect label, transect, oops, line length, observation, perp distance, and observation, and this time it'll give me a drop down for species. There it is, because I already created the species field. Next, and finish the import. There we go, so it's imported them just the same as before. Okay, there's a couple more things I want to show you before I finish this, so let me just close that project and go back to my folder that has all this demonstration data in it. One of them is this, simple data species label.txt. So this is exactly the same as there's a simple data species that we've seen before. This one is exactly the same, but it has a header row in it. So the first row is a header row, and that header row has got in it layer name star field name. So region star label, and then a semicolon, region star area, line transect star label. So you can see this is the layer name and the field name of the layers that I want to import. And the reason I've done that is there is an option in distance. If I just go back into distance again, I can open up the project that I just was using before. And if I do data import wizard again, tools, import data wizard, and I find that file that I just showed you. Here it is. Hopefully this is going to work. There's an option here where it says the first row contains layer names and field names of each column, with a delimiter being, in this case, the star, but you can choose anything, some other possibilities as well. And so in this case, as you can see, the first row does indeed contain those layer names and field names, as I showed you before. So I should be able to tick on this, and it automatically knows which row, which field to put each of the rows in. So in this case, they don't have to be in the same order as they are on the data sheet. It'll just pick up the layer name and the field name straight out of the text file. So that's going to make things a little bit easier if you're importing data that has lots and lots of fields in it. If I just click overwrite existing data, then there we go. So there's all the data imported again. Okay, the last thing I want to show you, so that's a little trick for making things easier. The last thing I want to show you is the problem with this kind of a setup. So let me just open this one up. Is that you have to have the stratum name lots and lots of times, and then there's stratum A, and I've got it 4 times, and the area 4 times, and then stratum B. So you have to have it repeated lots and lots of times, depending what for each line that you've got, and then for each observation that you've got. So there's lots of repeated information in here. In fact, this isn't the way Distance stores the data internally. It stores it as a relational database, and there's a separate table inside Distance for the stratum information, and then for the line transect information, and then for the observation information. That's what those data layers are. They're separate tables of data. And that's much more efficient because then it needs to just store the stratum record once. And then for the line table, it needs to store the line names and the line lengths once, and it needs an additional column telling it which stratum each line goes in. So you can import data into Distance one data layer at a time if you want to. And what I've got as some of these files is exactly that. So I have a file called stratum.txt here, and that has at the top just a header column, but then after that there is, which you can use or you don't need a header column, but after that there's just one record for each stratum with the area in it. And then I have a transect, here it is, a transect file, text file, And this has got, first of all, well, here in the middle is the line name, line 1A, 2A, line 1B, line 2B. But I also need to know which stratum to put each line in. So there's a column here for stratum, stratum A, stratum B. And then the other thing I need is the transect length. And then you won't be surprised to hear that I have an observation. There it is, an observation text file. And the first column in that is the transect. So it's going to tell distance which transect to put each observation in. And the second column is the distance column here. So you can import data that way if you want to. So let me show you how to do that. So if I open up distance again, file, I'll create a new project. Call this one simple data or simple project by layer, let's say. Doesn't really matter. Analyze a new data set that's been completed. Okay, all these are fine. Default units are fine. Multipliers. Go to the data import wizard. Data import wizard has started. So I need to tell it where to find the file. I'm going to import the stratum file first, and then the transect file, and then the observation file. So, whoops, go find them. Here's the stratum file. Okay, so now I do something different in this next thing because I don't want to import all the way from the region down to the observation. I'm just importing the stratum file, in other words, region. So the lowest data layer is region, whoops, and the highest data layer is region. I want to add all the records under the first record of the parent layer. That's fine in this case. And I want to create one new record for each file, each line. That's fine. So there it is. It's semicolon delimited. I want to ignore the first row. And the first thing there is the region label. The next is the region area. Oh, yeah, decimal's fine. Okay, so finish. That's fine. So it's imported now the region. So now I want to open up the wizard again and import the transect data. So if you look right now, you'll see that there isn't any transect data at all. So tools, import data wizard. Again, so I'm going to call the wizard 2 more times, right? Once to import the transect data and once to import the observation data. So let's go find it again. This would have been a lot easier. I put it in the same directory as put all my text files in the same directory as the project file. Oops. Transect. Okay, so this time the highest data layer is the transect and the lowest is the transect. And here I don't want to put all the new records under the first transect, the first record in the parent data layer, which is, sorry, not transect, is stratum, under the first stratum. I want the input file, I want to tell distance the input file contains a column corresponding to the label field in the parent data layer because I've got a column that corresponds to the stratum label. One new record for each line of the input file, that's fine. Okay, so semicolon delimited, don't import the first row. So that is going to be the stratum label. There's the transect label. And there's the transect length. Okay. It's asking me which one. Oh, I must have done something wrong because it's asking me which column corresponds to the label field in the study area layer. Let me go back and see what I did wrong. Oh, I clicked the wrong thing here. That's my fault. So the highest data layer here is the transect and the lowest data layer is the transect. The parent data layer is the region. Okay, so I'd inadvertently told it that I was going to import 2 layers at a time, whereas in fact I was just going to import 1. So I'm just importing the transect layer. The parent layer is region. The input file contains the label of the region layer. That's fine. Okay. Don't import the first row. This is the transect. Oh, sorry, that's the region label. That's the transect label. That's the transect length. Okay. Finish. Okay, so now I've got the transect data in. I just need to do this one more time to get the observation data in. So, tools, import data wizard. Sorry, hang on. I didn't bring it up so you can see it. There we go. I need to find the file one last time. So you can see this takes rather longer because you have to do the import wizard 3 times. But it's really worth it if you've got an enormous amount of data and you don't want to create one large flat file. So this is the observation data. So I want to just import the observation layer, and I want to tell it that there's the line transect labels there. It's semicolon delimited. And this is the transect label. This is the observation distance. There we go. What's it doesn't like? Line 1 skipped. Oh, I must have not told it to ignore the first record, so that's my bad. So let me just go back. Oh yes, I forgot to tick this button. I presume I forgot to tick this button that says do not import the first row. There we go. So you're getting a good view on what happens when you make an error as well. Sorry about that. Okay, so do not import the first row. My fault for rushing. Line transect label, observation distance. Okay, that should be it finished. And if I click on the observation layer here, yeah, you can see that those have imported correctly now. And there's the one transect here that doesn't have any observations associated with it. Okay, one very last thing I want to show you, which is if I just close the project here. If I create a new project, then one thing I can do, if I just call it new project, that's fine, is I can use an existing project here as a template. So if you already have a project that has the data structure set up the way you want, and also has a whole bunch of analyses set up the way you want, then you can choose this. It'll create a new project based on one that you already have. And then all you need to do is import the data, and then you can, if you want to, run the existing model definitions, data filters, analyses, and so on that project. So this is a nice idea if you repeatedly do the same kind of survey, for example, and just as an example, you want your field team to be able to do some quick analyses on the data, then you can set up the project exactly the way that you want it, and then all they need to do is import the data and press the run button, and they'll get some analyses that you've already set up done. So that can be useful. Okay, that's all I want to say right now about importing data into distance, or non-geographic data into distance. Thanks for listening.